It's Tim Archibald here, lead minister at St. Andrew's Church, and today I'm really happy to be able to welcome to this fall series Barry Morrison. This fall at St. Andrew's, we've been looking at the fruit of the Spirit, especially as it relates to our vision statement of growing life together with God, and thinking about how when we abide in Jesus, that Jesus is able to grow fruit in us, abundant fruit. And so as we've been working our way through the fruit of the Spirit, we've been having a conversation about each one and how God is able to grow them in us. And today I've invited Barry to come and to give some reflections on gentleness, which is what we're looking at this week. And I've known Barry for quite a long time, probably on towards 2 decades. He's actually had a very significant influence on me as a person. He's both a retired professor of worship and preaching and also a retired Baptist pastor. And it's been my pleasure to know him as a colleague and spent over 10 years in the same colleague covenant group together in Nova Scotia. And so it's really a pleasure to welcome you today to St. Andrew's. Barry, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And I know from having Barry as a friend that he excels in the area of gentleness. The Spirit's done a good work in him. And so I thought he was a perfect person to bring some conversation and thoughts to us today at St. Andrew's on this gift of the Spirit of gentleness. And so I wondered, Barry, if you could even just describe a little bit about what you understand as gentleness, this gift of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a wonderful word and a wonderful quality of Christ-likeness. The more I've been thinking about Paul's listing of the fruit of the Spirit in that 5th chapter of Galatians, the more it seems to me as if he's piling on words, trying to get to his point. There's love and there's joy and there's more. There's peace, there's patience, there's long suffering, there's gentleness. And so none of these is something that he sees in isolation from the others, but all of them come together in a magnificent collage of Christ-likeness. The Greek word that's translated in this passage as gentleness has many fitting synonyms. Words like humility, considerateness, meekness, someone who is unassuming, lowly, modest, someone who is generous of spirit. So all of these things come together, I think, in the word gentleness. In the ancient Greek language, this word can be used of things when it could be referring to a gentle breeze, for example. And we know how pleasant that can be compared to a raging storm, or a gentle voice. Of persons, it can refer to someone who is mild in disposition and gracious, who is never angry at the wrong time, but can still be angry at the right time. I found one reference that talked about a horse that was once wild and having been tamed is now called gentle. And yet beneath this tame appearing gentleness is tremendous strength. So there's a steel in the core. Contrary to popular sense of someone who is lacking in conviction or spineless or passive, this gentleness of which the New Testament speaks talks about great strength, but strength that is under appropriate control.
Well, that's very interesting. I really appreciate, especially that balance that you're talking about. I wondered if you could give us any examples of personal experiences of gentleness that have been especially meaningful and kind of left a significant imprint on you as a person.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure that I've experienced more gentleness than I've been aware of, as people have treated me kindly beyond measure and generous beyond what might have been called for in any given situation. I turn my mind back about 45 years when I was a second-year divinity student, and I knew it all, as second-year divinity students tend to do. And I was in an intergenerational class and said something that must have been a little bit outspoken or outrageous or ill-informed in the class. I can't remember what it was, but I do remember that a classmate who was probably 25 or 30 years older than I said something in response. And well, then we just went on. About 2 hours later, after the class had finished, I became aware of what he was really saying. He was correcting me, pointing out the weakness of what I had said, and maybe even reprimanding me. But he did it so gently that I didn't even know what was going on until there was this time for it to sink into me. And when the lights finally went on, I went to find him and said, Art, I want to thank you for the gracious, gentle way in which you corrected me. And I've always remembered that. He could have pounced on me. He could have shattered me, humiliated me in front of the rest of the class. And yet he chose a far higher way, I think, to deal with a young whippersnapper who needed to be put in his place. Another instance comes to mind, again from some time ago, and I refer to it because it has stayed with me for so long and has informed the way that I've tried to think about people and try to deal with people, imperfectly as that may be. It was a line that came from Reverend Maurice Boyd, who was a minister originally from Canada, but serving a church in New York City. And he was preaching on Jesus' encounter with the woman taken in adultery. And you remember how the accusers dropped their stones one by one from the oldest to the youngest. And Jesus says to the woman, now standing alone, does no one condemn you? No one, Lord, she replies. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Why was Jesus so gentle with her? Boyd asks. And the answer that he imagines and puts to us as we contemplate the deeper meanings of that text was something like this: because Jesus understood that she was somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody's little girl. And with that sense of deep compassion, he treated her with all the grace and mercy that he could muster.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think about that still, and I'm challenged and inspired by that still.
Absolutely. I wondered, Barry, finally, if you could share a few thoughts as well on how you think that we can allow the Spirit to grow greater gentleness in us, especially in a time like this during a pandemic. I know here in the city of Calgary, we've had examples that make the news regularly of customers that are really not very gentle and kind with people. It's almost like they have a short fuse and really quick to anger, and it's been a concern during such a crisis and pandemic as this. So I think gentleness really is important at a time like this. So could you share any ideas on how we can better allow the Spirit to grow this in us?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe first a kind of theological idea. Often in the Old Testament, God is described not in those philosophical terms of omnipotence and omnipresence and so on, but rather in very personal terms. I'm thinking of a verse which says, God is merciful, tender-hearted, slow to anger, very loving, all of which are gathered up in this word gentleness. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that were to become a kind of prayer phrase for us in our quiet moments. Lord, let me be formed with your mercy, your understanding, your loving kindness, the way you are slow to anger, the way you always try to think the best of others. So often, I think, especially under the pressures that we're living right now, and feeling our own sense of deprivation and frustration and anxiety, uh, it can become so easily all about us.
Right.
Whereas reflecting on the way of Jesus with others, it was never all about him. It's all about the other. And so I think if there are things we can do to cultivate this sense of compassion, of trying to understand someone else's suffering, maybe that would help us into this kind of not self control, but God controlled way of being in the world. Um, Once in a while, someone will apologize for being late or for having made a mistake, uh, things which are probably beyond their control. And I try to remember to say, well, I try to say, it's not your fault. Whereas it would be so easy to blame them.
Right.
Of course, it's your fault. It's not your fault. And even if it was a mistake made, um, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. I have a friend who would always wait a long time for people who arrived late to appointments, and he would never fuss and fume. He would always think, something must have happened to delay them. A real spirit of gentleness that I observed in him.
Absolutely.
So I think compassion, and compassion leads to wise action, keeps us focused on the needs of others, and hopefully there are those around us who will be focused on our needs as well. So together in community, we have a sense of supporting one another in this spirit of gentleness.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for these very wise words, Barry, today. I know that God will use them for good to those who listen. So we thank you and really appreciate the time you've given to us here at St. Andrews today.
Thank you, Tim, and God bless you and all those with whom you serve.
Thank you.